Good morning from Arizona.
Good morning. How's it?
Hello,
How's it?
everybody.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Rabbi, I
Greetings
went on my first
from
protest
Arizona.
march.
Just
How
had
are
one of the largest spikes in corona in the country.
Yeah.
How's everybody doing?
Okay.
We drove through Navajo land yesterday, which is almost completely shut because of how many corona cases they've had on the reservation. So
So you didn't stop in Cameron?
we didn't stop in There's nothing's open.
Oh, that one area is not open in Cameron?
You can drive through it, but you can't get out anywhere. What's it called was completely shut, which is fairly not large, but bigger than most places, is Tuba City. Tuba City was the only thing open was the grocery store, and you had to get a thermometer check when you went in. So Tracy and the girls wanted to use the restroom. No restroom there.
What about Page?
We didn't drive through Page.
You didn't?
No.
Oh, Page is a little north of there where you come in.
Yeah, we the 64 is closed, so you have to drive down to Flagstaff and then.
Oh, so you have to go in through Flagstaff?
Yeah, which was nice. I mean, we had dinner in Flagstaff, but it's not as quick, obviously, but and it's also doesn't give we didn't get to come in on the east.
Right, the east side is the best. Too
So
bad.
that was disappointing. You actually can't. It doesn't matter what time of day. It's closed about halfway between where you come down on the 80 on the what was it, the 89 or no one? It's the what is it, the one?
Yeah, 89.
Is 89? Yeah, 89. When you come down the 89, the 64 cuts across and then goes down. That's the one you take up from Flagstaff from Williams. That is closed. The 64 is closed both directions right there. So we'll let everybody in. We have a nice crowd today, so I'm glad we had a chance to be there. My family's out. They already started going out hiking. I'm gonna meet up with them in a little bit and check out. But yeah, it's not good in Arizona. It is, and that's not why I'm coughing right now. But it it is. They're having a huge spike in Arizona right now, and people are a little panicky here. So. Well, it's good to have everybody here. Almost on time too. And we are reading the story of Joseph, which is it's one of the more endearing stories, but it's really actually not a kid's story. We know about it from Joseph Technicolor Dreamcoat, but it's really not an easy story to wrap your head around because it's actually a scary story. So we're going to have a chance to look at that today. And thinking about getting thrown in a pit down here at the Grand Canyon. That is the ultimate pit is the Grand Canyon, which like I said, we didn't get to see last night. But again, I'm really hoping that these Navajo lands, they're able to get out of this corona situation.
Are you staying in the village or are you staying at the canyon?
No, we're just out. We're in
So you're in the Grand Canyon village.
We're at the Grand, just by the airport.
Right.
But I really hope the Navajo situation gets better because like all their stores, the craft jewelry stores, all that stuff is closed, and obviously that's a crucial. All tourism is down, but that's crucial for the Native American population in that area. It's not good. So let's hope that gets fixed soon. And interestingly, I will tell you, over the last couple of days since I've seen you, we were passing through Utah, which has one of the lowest corona cases in the country, pretty low rates. But it was very interesting because parts of Utah, the more conservative parts, no one's wearing masks. And then we went to Moab and we went to Arches the last couple of days, and everyone's wearing masks there. So it's definitely, you notice the political ramifications of wearing masks, even in a state like Utah. So again, Moab is a kind of a funky town. It's a little bit like Austin, you know. It's kind of like doesn't really fit in with the rest of Utah, and but it was really nice. A lot of vegetarian restaurants and that kind of stuff. It's more a hippie place, but it was gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous in Moab. So it is funny too, going to all these places that I've heard about, and I've never been to this part of Utah, and seen all the places with biblical names like Moab and Zion and you know, it's kind of funny to see all those places.
Did you go to Sedona?
We did. We're north of Sedona right now, so we're not going that far south. We're actually going to be heading back, and
That's too bad because Sedona, where we used to live, was great. It's great.
Sedona is a beautiful place. I mean, I've been to Sedona, but Sedona is definitely.
Sedona.
I used to live there.
That's on my list. I really want to go there.
So beautiful.
I really want to go
Before
there.
you go, you talk to Mike and Mary because they know Sedona. So
Don't eat in Sedona.
So, yeah. Well, we also had, by the way, Flagstaff was really nice too, by the way, I have to say. Even though we were only there for dinner, they fixed up this area, the San Francisco street, and it's got a lot of nice restaurants and, you know, clubs and stuff like that. It was, you know, college town. It's NAU. But, yeah, it's not a bad place, actually, Flagstaff, to stop at least. I don't know what it's like to live.
Yeah, they only get 24 inches of snow a year.
Well, you forget when you
Nothing.
come up here again, every
Nothing.
year, every time you come up here, how woodsy it is up by the Grand Canyon. You forget it's like being in, not Yosemite, but it's like being in the forest. I mean, it is.
The San Francisco peaks get about 6 feet of snow, 7 feet of snow a year.
So I definitely encourage people when they feel comfortable to at least to come out. A lot of these places are not crowded. There's not a lot of people, and people seem to be social distancing. So, well, we're going to jump in, and I'm glad we had everybody here. We're going to probably have to finish a few minutes early because I have to check out at 11. So I'm in a hotel, nothing fancy. I wish I could show you something outside, but there's some trees, but that's about it. Other than that, it's not a great view. The view at Zion last week was much nicer, but for those who were here Wednesday night. So we're going to jump into Joseph. I do have another issue too, which is I would love to show you the different authors in Genesis in chapter 37, because it really does help us, but we don't have time for it. Not only do we not have time for it, it's not what we're studying. We're studying the Midrash. But chapter 37 is a little confusing because it has different authors, and it has some stuff going on that is fairly contradictory and makes a lot more sense when it's read in the different sections. So let's take a look at the Torah first before we head over to the Midrash. So we looked at this already a little bit with the dreams, where Joseph at least has his dreams, not the in dreams he interprets, but the dreams that are his dreams. So it says, Jacob settled in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan. This is the line of Jacob. So far, very typical for Genesis. At 17 years of age, Jacob tended the flocks with his brothers as a helper to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. So it seems like Joseph is more attached in the Torah, and we talked a little bit about this in the Midrash, with the sons of the concubines, people, the individuals like Dan and Naphtali. And it said, and Joseph brought bad reports of them to their father. So that's one thing. He brings bad reports about the flocks. And then, but by the way, it seems like he's kind of low on the totem pole if he's a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, who aren't even the sons of Leah. Now,
Do you think maybe he wasn't welcome to the sons of Leah, and he could, be big man with the concubine's children?
That seems to be part of the issue. That the rabbis do touch on that a little bit, in the sense that they have a better relationship with him than the sons of Leah, the older ones. Remember, they're also older, much older than him. But all of these issues are at work here with the dynamics of why Joseph is not liked. Now, again, and like I said, I'm not going to dwell on it a lot, but now we go to, now Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons, for he was a child of his old age, and he made him an ornamented tunic. Now, again, one of the keys that we have a different author here is that it just changed the name of Jacob. It just called him Israel. And again, we know he has both names, but this is actually a really interesting difference, but yet in the way we have it and the way the rabbis had it, these are two separate issues, but they combine to make a more forceful issue. If one author had the story of Joseph giving bad reports, and then another author had a story of Joseph having a coat, think about what happens there. If they're two different stories, then rather than being combined problems, one person really puts the issue more on Joseph, and the other one here kind of puts it a little bit more on Jacob for making him the coat and favoring him and showing favoritism, which is the root of the problem, rather than Joseph maybe being part of his own problem, which is giving bad reports, which is definitely seen as maybe it was justifiable to some extent, but bringing bad reports is considering tattling. And
it says in the bad reports, it says bad reports of them. Who is them? The
brothers,
concubines?
the brothers,
Brothers.
the brothers. And it seems as though maybe it's the older brothers, but we're not exactly sure which brothers. Is it the same brothers that he was helping, or was it the older brothers that really didn't like him and looked down on him? And then this story continues, or this verse, whatever. I mean, the story continues. And when his brothers saw their father loved him more than any of his brothers, they hated him, and they would not speak a friendly word to him. And then it says, once Joseph had a dream, which he told his brothers, and they hated him even more. Well, now that does seem to be with this other text. This definitely seems to kind of be continuing, and that there's another thing here too. So what I'm saying here is that when you read the stories combined, there's actually going to be three things that cause the tension. It could be that there was one story where there was one, and then another story where there were two. But what we have is a combined three, because here's the third thing. The third thing is the dream. So we have bad reports, we have the coat, and now we have the dream. And here's the dream. And again, we kind of touched on this a little bit last week. We talked about the dream. That hear this dream which I've dreamed. They were binding sheaves in the field, when suddenly my sheaf stood up and remained upright, when your sheaves gathered around and bowed low to my sheaf.
Oh.
His brothers answered, do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us? And they hated him even more. So that seems to be, again, the dream of the sheaves is one dream, and the sheaves bowing down seem to be the brothers. Then it says he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers, saying, look, I've had another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. And when he told his father and brothers, his father berated him, said, what he said to him is this dream you have dreamed. Are we to come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow low to you to the ground? Which is interesting, because as we pointed out last week, Rachel was already dead by this point. She's not alive. But she could still be represented in the dream, because it's mother, father, the sun and the moon, and then 11 stars. And so then it says, even though the father was mad, it says, so his brothers were wrought up at him, and his father kept the matter in mind. So that's the setup. The setup for the story is as follows. That's what we've got. And now here's the crux of the narrative. It begins here. And it says, one time, when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's flock at Shechem, the same place where Simon and Levi had killed people in revenge for the rape of Dinah, Israel said to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing at Shechem. Come, I will send you to them. And he answered, Hineni, which we know is the key word in the Bible. And he said to him, go and see how your brothers are and how the flocks are faring, and bring me back word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. When he reached Shechem, a man came upon him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you looking for?" So again, the fact that he runs into a random guy in the fields is critical. He answered, "I'm looking for my brothers. Could you tell me where they are pasturing?" The man said, "They have gone from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph followed his brothers and found them at Dothan. So that's the first part of the story of how Joseph is sent and finds his brothers. And as you can see, it is strange that Jacob willingly sends him out, knowing that the brothers don't like him. We know that Joseph has kept it in mind. He's thought of this. He's aware of the fact that the brothers don't like him. And the fact that Joseph encounters a man in the field, an unnamed, unknown man. Oh, you know what? I'm being reminded that I am not on Facebook. Sorry, folks. And I also have people that are waiting outside. I am
Oh,
not a good host. Wow, we have such a wonderful big group today that I was not focused. I jumped right in.
on
Sorry.
vacation.
Sorry. Yeah, I was sorry, everybody who just joined in and the people I just let in. I apologize for not paying attention. I was in the text. Okay, give me 1 second, everybody, as I post up on YouTube. Facebook. So we're just getting into the story, though. We haven't even looked at the Midrash yet. So we just set up, give everybody a view of the Torah. For those that are just joining us, we just got a view of the Torah. And we are now live on Facebook. 1 second. And thank you, everybody. All right. So, yep. So let's take a look at the Midrash. Let us jump in. So, we are starting here. What we read last time again was essentially where we left off in the Midrash is that this is all set up from the beginning. The rabbis kind of remind us that this had to happen. And even though it's a terrible story, there was predestination here. Because the last thing we had read is that Abraham was told, and again, it seems that Abraham was told because he had doubted God, that he would be the ancestor of a great nation, that his people would have to go down. And this is, again, something that the rabbis took into consideration. The Torah doesn't seem to take into consideration so much that this was the way things had to be, but the rabbis definitely do. So, Rosemary, you ready to take us through the Midrash?
I will do that.
We're not seeing the Midrash on our
I'm
screen.
not seeing it.
Yeah, let me get off the Torah and back on to the Midrash. There we go. Sorry. There we go.
Okay. Move the screen. So there we go. Okay. Joseph reached Shechem, where he expected to find his brethren. Shechem was always a place of ill omen for Jacob and his seed. There Dinah was dishonored. There the 10 tribes of Israel rebelled against the house of David, while Rehoboam ruled in Jerusalem, and there Jeroboam was installed as king. Not finding his brethren in the herd in Shechem, Joseph continued his journey in the direction of the next pasturing place, not far from Shechem, but he lost his way in the wilderness. Gabriel, in human shape, appeared before him and asked him, saying, "What do you seek?" And he answered, "I seek my brothers." Whereto the angel replied, "The brothers have given up the divine qualities of love and mercy. Through a prophetic revelation, they learned that the Hivites were preparing to make war upon them, and therefore they departed hence to go to Dothan. and they had to leave this place for other reasons too. I heard while I was still standing behind the curtain that veils the divine throne that this day the Egyptian bondage would begin, and you would be the first to be subjected to it. Then Gabriel led Joseph to Dothan.
Wow. So let's talk about the Midrash that you just read. This picks up on the idea that this was destiny, that the bondage in Egypt had to happen, and that Joseph, to some extent, according to this version, is a willing participant in it. That Joseph willingly goes into this disaster, knowing that he's fulfilling the prophecy, and he is a participant, a narrative that requires him to go through hell in order to essentially have this happen, which again isn't just for him and his brothers, but for generations of Israelites that are going to be slaves. This is there's a couple things here that, of course, we need to say, which is that in the rabbinic mind, this is not a person that Joseph encounters on the way to Dothan. This is an angel. Now, in some versions of the Midrash, the angel is flat out named, as it was here, that it's Gabriel, an angel that is part of a tradition that, an angelic tradition, that Gabriel is the one who makes announcements and who is the one who, well, later on in Christian tradition, is the one who announces Jesus. In Islamic tradition, is one of the angels that kind of takes the role of sharing information with Muhammad. And also in apocalyptic tradition, is the one who announces the end of the world. So Gabriel is the one who blows his trumpet and begins Armageddon and begins the final days. So the fact that Gabriel is part of this trial that Joseph goes through is consistent with the kind of the versions of Gabriel's of what Gabriel does. So Gabriel is not he's not without complications in the sense that Gabriel is seen as a an angel. He's doing divine work. You don't necessarily want to see Gabriel in the sense that it could be that bad things, or if not bad things, some very scary and difficult days are on their way. Because of course the apocalypse is followed by, time of peace and, messianic age, or whatever you want to, however you want to, the final rapture. I mean, all of those things, they're going to wind up being okay, but you don't want to live through the part of time that Gabriel is announcing. So this is who, according to the Midrash, or at least this one Midrash, that he encounters. Sometimes it's just an unnamed angel. It's not. In some versions of Midrash, Joseph doesn't encounter a named angel. He encounters an angel. Why is it an angel? Because for the rabbis, anybody who's doing something as important as this must have been sent there by God. The person who's going to send Joseph on his way has got to be a divine messenger. Can't be a random guy. And the fact that in the Torah, as we just looked at, he's not named, he's called a man three times. The rabbis kind of interpret from that the repetition of it, that it actually isn't, he's a man. He's not a real, he's an angel looking like a man. So the repetition of the pronoun itself to the rabbis, that's an indicator of something else, that it's a hint that it's not a man at all. But again, the bigger issue for them is, how could somebody who has such a big role to play not be named? Where, you know what? There's an interesting possibility here too, which is it is a random person. And I always like to say when we read this, when we read it as the weekly Parsha, or as we read it, whenever we read it, I like to remind people that we encounter people in our lives, random people, who set us on a different direction. And we maybe never get their names, but our whole lives are different because we met them. Because they told us or gave us some piece of information that, puts us on a whole different path. It could be a teacher, it could be it could be somebody that, again, that just gave us a direction like this angel / man does, and our whole lives are different. So, I always like to remind people that you've had experiences like this where somebody or some individual or something puts you on a whole different direction. And sometimes we don't know those people's names. Sometimes we don't know where they came from or how they ended up doing it. And sometimes it doesn't seem like it was a good thing. And then sometimes we realize that if it hadn't been for them, we wouldn't have gotten to this place. And it all depends on where you stop the story. If you stop the story when you're in a bad place, you don't like the guy. But when you think about the good things and you're in a place where you appreciate where your life is, you say, wow, that was an angel. That person was really a messenger from God. Because even if I hadn't gone through the bad things. So I do like to always take a moment to stop on this guy in the field, the man who directed them to Dotan, and Joseph to Dotan, and the Jewish people on a road to the history that's still unraveling for us today. So that chance encounter, if you will. By the way, there's a Dotan or Dothan in Alabama or Mississippi. I don't know. It's in Alabama, somewhere down south. People love to use biblical places, even if they're only named occasionally, or maybe in some cases once. But there's a Dothan. They don't call it Dotan, it's Dothan. Which, by the way, I just want to point out, about 10 years ago, this little town of Dothan started paying, just a random thing. They started paying, not random, it's just random coincidence that it happened to be named Dothan. They were paying Jews to move there. They started it was a city that had, a town that had Jews back 100 years ago, and they had all left. There was still a synagogue there. There's about, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 Jews left. They started paying people to move to Dothan. And we gave them
The Jewish community or the government?
Yeah, it was the Jewish community. No, it was not a government.
It was
It was not the great state of Alabama.
Look, here are our Jews.
No, it was, they have a beautiful synagogue there, and a guy who grew up there. I just happened to, I don't know why it came up again, but if I don't want to encourage anyone to move there necessarily, we don't want to lose more people in our community, but I will tell you that the Bloomberg Family Jewish Community Services, established in 2007, the JCS mission is to seek, build, and sustain the continuity of a vibrant Jewish community at Temple Emmanuel of Dothan, Alabama. Are you seeing this?
Yes.
Yes.
$50,000 per family to relocate.
Yeah.
Why don't we all go together?
Qualify.
Just take
Well,
over.
they take an Episcopalian.
I
could use 50,000.
I looked at exactly, kind of where Dothan is. It's about equidistant from nothing. There's nothing with it. It's like Tallahassee is, 2.5 hours away. Some other, I forget where it was, somewhere in Alabama. I mean, nothing. Memphis is 2.5 hours. There's nothing within, 2 hours. But, they interview, if you want to spend some time looking at this, they have interviews with a few people who did it. It actually, a few people did it. I mean, anyways, that's
But you'd have to move to Alabama.
Does it matter which stream you belong to? Do you have to join their synagogue if you move?
Yeah, part of it is they pay for your membership It's a Reform synagogue.
I was
Okay.
going to
Well,
say,
Oh,
does that 50,000 include membership or is that on top?
no, it gives you like
Judith, let's not get greedy
you
here.
get 10 years of free membership at Dothan, Alabama.
we'll move there. We'll move there and we'll be closer to
I
Cassie.
didn't want anybody to. I just didn't want to encourage it. I just wanted to share with you this weird thing that there is a Dothan in America.
I think we should all go.
Me too. I think it's just time. Let's take a vote.
All right. Well, I heard about this story a few years ago, and it turned out I just, just randomly, I started looking to see if this was still going on because, again, I mean, people talk about different parts of the country. Well,
We'll go, but only if they let us bring our rabbi.
Yes.
well, they doesn't seem like they have a full-time rabbi, but yeah, it's a beautiful little shul down there in Dothan, from probably 120 years ago. So there's Dothan and the angel or the man sending them there. I love thinking about those people. And again, sometimes we know their names and sometimes we don't. And sometimes we curse them and sometimes we bless them. That there is a sermon on whenever you get to that portion, there's a chance to think about the crazy people in our lives, the crazy things in our lives that put us off in different directions, and how we look at them. And again, where we stop the moment and say, well, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have met this person. I wouldn't have met my husband. I would have had kids. And again, depends on how you're feeling at the time. All right, so let's continue, and then we're going to get to the pit.
Okay. When his brothers saw him afar off, they conspired against him to slay him. Their first plan was to set dogs on him. Shimon then spoke to Levi. Behold, the master of dreams comes with a new dream. He whose descendant Jeroboam will introduce the worship of Baal. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, that we may see what will become of his dreams. But God spoke. You say, we shall see what will become of his dreams. And I say, likewise, we shall see. And the future shall show whose word will stand, yours or mine.
So the Torah, and again, this scene, well, let's take a quick look back at the Torah. This is not exactly the way it plays out in the Torah. What it says in the Torah is they saw him from afar. When they see Joseph, he says Joseph followed his brothers and found him in Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came close, they conspired to kill him. So they saw him in this first part, and they said they want to kill him. Now, I will tell you, here is where the authorship makes this flow a lot better, because the way the stories were woven together, it seems redundant and it seems a little out of order because we just heard this. They said to one another, here comes the dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say a savage beast devoured him. We shall see what becomes of his dream. And then it says, and when Reuben heard it, he tried to save him from them. He said, let us not take his life. And Reuben went on, shed no blood, cast him in that pit out in the wilderness, but do not touch him yourselves, intending to save him from them and restore him to his father. And then it says, when Joseph came up to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the ornamented tunic that he was wearing, and took him and cast him in the pit. The pit was empty, there was no water. Then they sat down to a meal. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, their camels bearing gum, balm, and laudanum, to be taken to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, what do we gain by killing our brother and covering up his blood? Now, again, I'm just going to say, if you read the two stories separately, they don't sound like this. Because in this story, we just read, Reuben tried to save him and had calculated it already. In this version, Judah is the one who saves him and plans on selling him. Now, the problem is in one story, Reuben is the hero, and in another story, Judah is the hero. Now, guess what? The version of the story where Judah is the hero was written by the descendants of Judah, the Judahites, the southern kingdom. In the other version, it's the northern kingdom led by Reuben, the oldest son, the oldest Israelite, who is the hero of the story. Now, the stories are woven together, and so that we have a story that works, it just sounds a little awkward when we read it. If you pull them apart, the story reads really well. But it's not the purpose of this, because what we're dealing with is the Midrash, which is the story as it exists, with it being woven together. Now, Judah says, "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, but let us not do away with him ourselves. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh." His brothers agreed. Then it says, when the Midianite traders passed by, then Joseph pulled him out of the pit. They sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who brought Joseph to Egypt. So again, I know now that you've read this carefully, and I haven't even said anything yet. Where do these Midianites come from?
Yeah.
The reality is, again, in one version of the story, it's Midianites, and in the other story, it's the people of Ishmaelites. Now, in the version of Ishmael, when you read the story, they sell him to the Ishmaelites all along. Because he says, "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites." Now, here's the other version of the story. When you have the story of look, the rabbis are going to conflate it because that's what they have. They can't say it's two different authors. There is a version of the story where, again, if we look at the story from where the other author left off, the Reuben hero author, Reuben said, "Shed no blood, cast him into that pit in the wilderness, but do not touch him yourselves," intending to save him from them and restore him to his father. So in that version, he tells the brothers, don't kill him, throw him in the pit, and then Reuben's thinking, I'm going to come back and save him. But in this version, you have to go from this line to this next line, which is, when Midianite traders passed by, they pulled Joseph out of the pit. Now, it seems there that the Midianites pulled him out and then sold him to the Ishmaelites. Well, that doesn't make any sense, because what really happens is, "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites." His brothers agreed. They sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver to Ishmaelites. The Midianites didn't do that. Judah and the brothers did it. But this line, when the Midianites traders passed by, they pulled Joseph out of the pit, goes back to the Reuben version of the story, where Reuben throws him in the pit, has the brothers throw him in the pit. He's going to come back, but before Reuben can come back, the Midianites came by and took him out. In that version, there was no selling of Joseph that was ever going to happen. It was literally throw him in the pit, he'll die in the pit. Reuben's basically saying, let him die. Don't kill him. Throw him in the pit, let him die, but don't shed his blood. I mean, it's essentially killing him, but Reuben wasn't going to let that happen. Reuben was going to come back and get him. But when Reuben, in this version of the story, doesn't know, and hadn't foreseen that Midianites were going to come by, pull him out and take him. In that version, Joseph doesn't get sold. So there's two stories here that are woven together. It's a little bit harder to read this way, the way it's woven together, and it's contradictory. But it's the way we have it. And the reason that we have it is that the editors wanted both Reuben and Judah to get credit. They didn't want one to get credit for saving Joseph, and so we have both versions. But it doesn't work as well as a logical story. It works much better when you read this stuff separate. And I'm only pointing that out because we're reading it in depth. Let's get back to the way we have it, though. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he rent his clothes. But Reuben didn't know what happened. Returning to his brothers, he said, "The boy is gone. Now what am I to do?" They took Joseph's tunic, slaughtered a kid, and dipped the tunic in the blood. So in that version, the tunic is really important. It's part of what is going to help tell the story. They were ornamented tunic taken to the father, and they said, "We found this. Please examine it. Is it your son's tunic or not?" He recognized it and said, "My son's tunic. A savage beast devoured him. Joseph was torn by a beast. Now notice the brothers never actually said, your son was torn by a beast. They just brought him a bloody coat and said, we found it. What do you think happened? And they let Jacob's mind go there, and they let Jacob say it. So keep that in mind. The brothers actually never said the savage beast ripped our brother. I mean, obviously, by implication, they did that, but they didn't say it. So Jacob rent his clothes. Again, clothes being an important motif in this. He tears his clothes. Remember, by the way, it's kind of an off-the-cuff thing. Reuben rent his clothes. A lot of tearing of clothes right now, folks. A lot of clothes we hadn't ripped apart. So Jacob rents his clothes, and he observed mourning for his son many days. All his sons and daughters sought to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, saying, no, I will go down mourning to Sheol, to the netherworld. Thus his father bewailed him. The Midianites, meanwhile, sold him to Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh and his chief steward. Now, by the way, if anybody wants to say this isn't written by two authors, then tell me, how did the Midianites wind up being the ones who sold him? Because back there, if you have the two stories, it says they sold him to the Ishmaelites. It wasn't the Midianites who sold him to the Ishmaelites. In one version, the Ishmaelites took him, and and the brothers sold him, and in the other one, the Midianites took him, and they sold him to the Egyptians. So there's two different versions, one where the Midianites get the blame, if you will, and one where the Ishmaelites are more not really getting the blame, but are the conduit for what happens there. So just keep that in mind. And by the way, this goes to the book that I'll never write and no one will ever read, but what do the nations tell us about the Bible? When nations are mentioned, what is it actually telling us? The Ishmaelites here are not really bad guys, but they're kind of agents of this. In this story, the Midianites actually, I don't know if you could say that also they did something horrible, but, well, they kind of do. They pull Joseph out of a pit and then sell him. The Midianites, remember, in our later story, they're the people that Moses marries into. These are Moses's people by marriage. And in one version or one writer, the Midianites are not good people. So just keep that in mind too, that this is also part of the story is which nations are you going to dirt? And in this case, the Midianites definitely get dirted. Right. Thank you. Judith just shared with me that her father will read the book. So I will sell at least one copy of this book. But again, I think it's interesting who are you going to make the bad guys? Because I do think it's relevant. I mean, but you have to make it hyper relevant, which is you got to say, well, think about how many other people, when they're telling a narrative, are going to make somebody the bad guys, whether it's the Chinese or the Russians or the Arabs or whoever our bad guy is. What is the reason that these people, again, that doesn't minimize the fact that we may have real problems with them, but how do they fit into our narratives, and how do we make sense of our world by dirtying them? And I would just say that happened 2 days ago. So understand that narratives of who are the bad people, tell a lot about us. And again, it doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means that when we use them, what are we actually trying to do? What's our agenda in doing this? And again, by consequence, if we dirt a group, are we dirting everybody in that group? Because Miriam whenever you speak ill of the Midianites, there are people who are going, oh yeah, Zipporah, Moses' wife, wasn't she a Midianite? And again, isn't so-and-so Chinese? I mean, this is what happens because our minds go there. By human nature, we group people together and then we say all those people are part of that group. So the Midianites, they're the ones who do this. And there are no more Midianites left for us to obsess about or talk about, but they are in this story. So let's go back. Any comments before we get on the Midrash?
Only that the rabbis set it up where the sons have this prophetic power and know all about these kings that live hundreds of years later, but they don't know that Joseph is going to survive.
Yeah, but it's it's interesting that that they're that they're going to say all of this has to happen. But you're right, because the conceit is that everything has to happen for this to happen. So in order for Jeroboam, who's king after King David, we're talking about during King Solomon's time, for that to happen, the Israelites have to be enslaved. Moses has to take them out. Joshua has to take them in. The period of the judges and everything else has to happen to lead up to Jeroboam being king and being a bad king. And again, it's easy for us to say he was a bad king, but he was a king for the northern part of Israel who happened to be the people that we're not descendants of. But the northern kingdom was pretty powerful for a long time. So, yeah. So I will tell you, when we talk about how we're going to figure out where we're going to stop the story, we don't know. And that's one of the weird things about history, is that it's hard for us to know how this stuff is going to play out. Sometimes it seems like it's really bad. And the reality is, if it wasn't for that, it wouldn't have gotten to a brighter time. And I will tell you, the same thing is happening again right now with Israel today. I mean, you do not know whether some of the things that are being put into place now might wind up bringing more peace to the Middle East than any of us could ever imagine. So I will tell you, don't discount it, because almost by nature in the Middle East, the opposite happens. When you think it's really bad, it gets really good. And when you think it's really good, it gets really bad. It almost always works that way. I don't know why, but just don't think that in the darkest period, that's not actually where we're going to have something good, come out of it. And again, after the Yom Kippur War, Israel ended up having peace with Egypt, and then the rest of the nations in the Middle East that saw that Israel and the Arab countries couldn't fight wars anymore that were going to lead to any conclusion other than more death, more trauma. And so again, you never know. Just remember that. Don't despair. On the other hand, also don't think that things are always going to be the way they're going to be, good or bad. Just keep that in mind, and don't despair of that. All right. So here, let's talk about what the brothers do here in the Midrash, which again, the Midrash is trying to figure out how to make all these stories in the Torah, which seem a little contradictory. They're going to do their best to try to make this not seem as contradictory. And in some ways they make it even worse, but there's some interesting stuff here. Let's read.
Shimon and Gad set about slaying Joseph, and he fell upon his face and entreated them, "Have mercy with me, my brothers. Have pity on the heart of my father Jacob. Lay not your hands on me to spill innocent blood, for I have done no evil to you. But if I have done evil to you, then chastise me with a chastisement. But your hands lay not upon me for the sake of our father Jacob." These words touched Zebulun, and he began to lament and weep. And the wailing of Joseph rose up together with his brothers. And when Shimon and Gad raised their hands against him to execute their evil design, Joseph took refuge behind Zebulun and supplicated his other brothers to have mercy on him. Then Reuben arose and said, "Brothers, let us not slay him, but let us cast him into one of the dry pits, which our fathers dug without finding water." That was due to the providence of God. He had hindered the water from rising in them in order that Joseph's rescue might be accomplished. And the pits remained dry until Joseph was safe in the hands of the Ishmaelites.
So that's a pretty wild story, which is that the pits are dry to save Joseph. That if the pits had been with water, he would have drowned. If they would have been wells, he would have drowned when he threw them in. So Reuben knows that. Reuben knows that they're dry. He doesn't know that God has made them dry. God has caused this drought to some extent just to save Joseph. But in this version, the brothers are not all on the same page, because we have specifically that Zebulun is doesn't want to go along with this. It is also interesting that Joseph, in this version, in the Midrash, has a voice, says something, pleads for his life. In this sense, the Midrash gives us something that we kind of want to have, which is, what did Joseph say while this was going on? We don't hear him. We don't hear Joseph pleading for his life. What was his mindset? In this, he clearly sees, Joseph sees himself as a victim. He doesn't see there being any, that he bears any guilt for what's been happening. Well, let's take a look. Let's keep going.
Reuben had several reasons for interceding in behalf of Joseph. He knew that he, as the oldest of the brothers, would be held responsible by their father if any evil befell him. Besides, Reuben was grateful to Joseph for having reckoned him among the 11 sons of Jacob in narrating his dream of the sun, moon, and stars. Since his disrespectful bearing toward Jacob, he had not thought himself worthy of being considered one of his sons. First, Reuben tried to restrain his brothers from their purpose, and he addressed them in words full of love and compassion. But when he saw that neither words nor entreaties would change their intention, he begged them, saying, "My brothers, at least hearken to me in respect of this, that you be not so wicked and cruel as to slay him. Lay no hand upon your brother, shed no blood, cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and let him perish thus." Then Reuben went away.
Hold on 1 second. So in this, Reuben is, they give the rabbis essentially give a few reasons for why Reuben is working, so hard to save Joseph. The first seems the most obvious, which is that he's the oldest brother. He's the first son of Jacob. So if anything bad happens, he's going to be held responsible for it. He's the one that's going to get blamed. But then there's this weird idea that Reuben is just grateful that Joseph has taken any account of him at all. And so he's never been nice to Joseph. And like, he's thinking, well, the fact that Joseph even dreamed about me is, maybe he's paying attention to me. It's kind of weird. But again, Reuben's an interesting character because he's the son who should have been the one in power. He's the one who should be the one in control. And it doesn't seem like he's able to exercise much authority or leadership here as the oldest brother. Let's keep going.
Then Reuben went away from his brothers and he hid in the mountains so that he might be able to hasten back in a favorable moment and draw Joseph forth from the pit and restore him to his father. He hoped his reward would be pardoned for the transgression he had committed against Jacob. His good intention was frustrated, yet Reuben was rewarded by God, for God gives a recompense not only for good deeds, but for good intentions as well. As he was the first of the brethren of Joseph to make an attempt to save him, so the city of Bezer in the tribe of Reuben was the first of the cities of refuge appointed to safeguard the life of the innocent that seek help. Furthermore, God spoke to Reuben, saying, "As you were the first to endeavor to restore a child to his father, so Hosea, one of your descendants, shall be the first to endeavor to lead Israel back to his heavenly father."
So yes, so here we have Reuben being rewarded for his for trying to do the right thing. One is that one of the cities of refuge is, and the first listed is in the tribe of Reuben. So remember, there are cities of refuge in Israel where people would go to if they committed manslaughter, not murder, but if they accidentally killed somebody, they had to go to these cities and they had to live in these cities. And they were kind of ways to prevent people from being a victim of an eye for an eye kind of situation. So one of the rewards to Reuben is that he gets this city, and again, these 6 cities of refuge. But there's another piece here too, which is that because Reuben is trying to do the right thing, which again, is he doing the right thing, or is, he's doing the right thing. He's trying. He can't. It's not going to be effective. And again, as we said, there seems to be this predestination. There's nothing he can really do other than kind of almost fights against the tide, but he's going to be, it's going to be what it's going to be. It's predetermined. But because of Reuben trying to do the right thing, Hosea, the prophet Hosea, he's going to be a descendant. And Hosea, according to kind of the chronology of the prophets, not necessarily the prophets that are most well known, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, but as far as the chronology of the prophets, Hosea is really the oldest prophet in the prophetic books that we have. Hosea and Micah, these are the oldest prophets chronologically that go back, in the biblical chronology. So that's another thing that he gets. He gets to be the ancestor of a really great prophet. So the tribe of Reuben was not a major tribe, was not a big tribe, but there were some important things that Reuben did. But again, one of the other things about Reuben that we know about was that, he was responsible for something kind of strange, which is that, if you recall, he tried to, in some cases, again, by having a relationship with his stepmother, Bilhah, he kind of tries to take over from Jacob. He did something really bad. And this was something that Jacob, he curses his son for doing this, for basically taking over and trying to usurp his father by sleeping with his concubine. I mean, it's not his main wife, but it's still, a wife of his father. So Reuben is a complicated guy, and here they reference it, which is, again, he hoped his reward would be a pardon for the transgression he committed to Jacob. That's what they're referring to. They're referring to him sleeping with Bilhah. That story is, is one that it's one that, some people also say kind of was a precursor or foreshadow to what happens with King David and his sons, specifically Adoniah, who wants to sleep with his father David's concubine. So, I mean, there's other stuff going on there in the Reuben story, but that's what it means when it says Reuben was kind of trying to get back into good graces. That's what they're referring to, is the story of him sleeping with Bilhah. So, let's get back to the Midrash.
The brethren accepted Reuben's proposition, and Simon seized Joseph and cast him into a pit swarming with snakes and scorpions, beside which was another unused pit filled with offal. As though this were not enough torture, Shimon bade his brothers fling great stones at Joseph. In his later dealings with this brother Shimon, Joseph showed all the forgiving charitableness of his nature. When Shimon was held in durance in Egypt as a hostage, Joseph, so far from bearing him a grudge ordered crammed poultry to be set before him at all his meals.
So, again, we don't have the individual brothers doing stuff in this story. That's why, again, when you see Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, if you're cast as one of the brothers, generally speaking, you don't have a lot of lines. Because again, with the exception of Judah and Reuben, we don't really have the brothers individually doing things. But the rabbis like the brothers. First of all, they like knowing what was going on. They want to know more details, but they also like to know what the individual brothers do. And so they kind of have the story follow what their logic was, what you'd assume these different people would do. And since Simon is kind of this violent guy, the one responsible for the murder of the people in Shechem, what does he do? He's the one who grabs them and is the most violent. And again, the rabbis in the Midrash are saying that Joseph, though, is such a generous and forgiving person that he forgives Simon and allows Simon to be well taken care of. It doesn't say that he had poultry. He doesn't say he had stuffed quail served to him, but again, Simon was the brother who was held as hostage. So this idea that there's a reason for Simon to be in that situation, it's set up in the Midrash with Simon being the one who's really involved here. This next part is really famous. This is a really famous part of the Midrash of this. So let's read it.
Not satisfied with exposing Joseph to the snakes and scorpions, his brothers had stripped him bare before they flung him into the pit. They took off his coat of many colors, his upper garment, his breeches, and his shirt. However, the reptiles could do him no harm. God heard his cry of distress and kept them hiding in the clefts and the holes, and they could not come near him. From the depths of the pit, Joseph appealed to his brothers, saying, "Oh, my brothers, what have I done to you? And what is my transgression? Why are you not afraid before God on account of your treatment of me? Am I not flesh of your flesh and bone of your bone? Jacob, your father, is he not also my father? Why do you act thus toward me? And how will you be able to lift up your countenance before Jacob? O Judah, Reuben, Simon, Levi, my brothers, deliver me, I pray you, from the dark place into which you've cast me. Though I committed a trespass against you, yet you are children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were compassionate with the orphan, gave food to the hungry, and clothed the naked. How then can you withhold your pity from your own brother, your own flesh and bone? And though I sinned against you, yet you will hearken to my petition for the sake of my father. Oh, that my father knew what my brothers are doing to me and what they spoke to me."
So in this version of the story, Joseph most definitely says things. Joseph in the pit calling out his brothers. First of all, in the pit, he also takes responsibility for doing bad things, which or he says, "I committed trespass against you." He seems to, if he doesn't feel that he has, he says he does. Let's put it that way. And what he's saying to the brothers is really, really tough, which is, again, how are you going to look at dad, our dad? How are you going to look at our dad? And again, it's not just our dad, it's Abraham and Isaac. It's our grandfather and great grandfather as well. How can you do this when we're brothers? And even if I've done something wrong, how could you do this? How can you ever look at our father again? So he's not going quietly into the pit. And here's what the brothers do.
While Joseph was to avoid hearing Joseph's weeping and cries of distress, his brothers passed on from the pit and stood at bow shots distance. The only one among them that manifested pity was Zebulun. For 2 days and 2 nights, no food passed his lips on account of his grief over the fate of Joseph, who had to spend 3 days and 3 nights in the pit before he was sold. During this period, Zebulun was charged by his brothers to keep watch at the pit. He was chosen to stand guard because he took no part in the meals. Part of the time, Judah also refrained from eating with the rest and took turns at watching, because he feared Simon and Gad might jump down into the pit and put an end to Joseph's life.
So again, in this version, some of the brothers do different things. Zebulun is a hero in this. Judah is kind of a hero in it. Simon and Gad are definitely not heroes in this, in that they seem to be pretty violent. And the brothers are actually scared that those brothers are going to kill him, Joseph. I mean, the other thing about this, of course, it's strange, this Midrash, is that this goes on for days. 3 days, to be precise, 3 nights. This is not, does not happen in a few hours. This happens over days. Which, to some extent, makes it even more horrific. They sat there for days while this was going on, while their brother is going through this torture. Again, the fact that the pit is empty, in one version of this makes it really, really dangerous, because there's no water down there. There's nothing he can eat. It's empty. In another version of it, the fact that it's empty of water and is there could have been snakes, and there could have been scorpions and things like that down there too. Well, the story lends itself to the imagination. What was it like for Joseph in this pit? Now, it also kind of gets into your mind when the Midianites come by to take him out. At that point, does he wouldn't care who's getting him out or what's going to happen to him, because he's been essentially tortured for the last 3 days, or however. I mean, obviously, if it's over 3 days, it's that much worse. That he's been in this pit and screaming, crying out from in this pit. Again, you can see why in Christianity, with these kinds of midrash and these kinds of imagination of Joseph being tortured and being thrown into a pit, coming back out to life, you can see why in Christianity the story was so important in literature and in art, because it prefigures Jesus, the suffering, the unwarranted and just brutal treatment that Joseph gets, and then again coming out of the pit, coming out of the grave, does not have in the Torah that he's down there for 3 days. In the Midrash and in versions of this, and again to some extent in Christian Midrash, Joseph prefigures Jesus. And as we talked about last week, there's even this idea that a Messiah comes out of Joseph. There's actually a Joseph Messiah, Moshiach ben Yosef, that is part of the redemption of the Jewish people. There's a Messiah ben David, a Moshiach ben David, and also a Messiah, the son of Joseph. So again, Joseph's suffering like this is part of the narrative and part of what sets up Christian narrative as well. So it's pretty horrific, this midrash. But let's finish.
While Joseph was languishing thus, his brothers determined to kill him. They would finish their meal first, they said, and then they would fetch him forth and slay him. When they had done eating, they attempted to say grace, but Judah remonstrated with them. We're about to take the life of a human being and yet would bless God? That is not a blessing. That is contemning the Lord. What profit is it if we slay our brother? Rather will the punishment of God descend upon us. I have good counsel to give you. Yonder passes by a traveling company of Ishmaelites on their way to Egypt. Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. The Ishmaelites will take him with them upon their journeyings, and he will be lost among the peoples of the earth. Let us follow the custom of former days. For Canaan too, the son of Ham, was made a slave for his evil deeds, and so will we do with our brother Joseph.
So as we said last week, the sale of Joseph is also similar to the sale of Jesus. 30 pieces of silver in Judas's time is 20 pieces of silver here.
Right.
In their time,
Inflation.
but it is a, yes, inflation of 1,500 years or so. Of course, there would have been inflation, at least. But in all seriousness, I mean, this is a horrible story. Why is this such a horrible story, folks? I mean, obviously, I mean, it's a horrible story of, and again, get into some, Francie just asked about Zebulun. So Zebulun as a tribe later on, the interesting thing about Zebulun is a tribe of seafaring people. They're not a major tribe in Israel, and they're actually almost un-Israelite in the fact that they're tradespeople. They're merchants. They're not farmers or shepherds like most of the Israelites. They are the seafaring tribe, and again, lived along the coast. And so the Zebulonites are usually depicted with a ship as their symbol, but not one of the larger tribes, but have an interesting history. But again, why is this story so bad? And why is this such an important part of the Bible? Why is this Joseph's cycle? As we said, this is chapter 37, and it goes all the way to the end of chapter 50. Why is this story, this cycle of Joseph and his brothers, so important? Well, of course, they're our ancestors. They're setting up the 12 tribes. And so the things that go on here explain why the tribes are the way they are. But there's a bigger issue here too, which is the story of Genesis. This story, the story of Joseph and his brothers, is a horrible story. And the threat of death hangs over this story in a real way, in the sense that Joseph is almost killed by his brothers. I mean, there's a moment where he is about to be killed. And this goes back to Cain and Abel. This goes back to chapter 4 and the beginning of the story and the cycle of life and families, where this almost happens. We're this close to having a brother kill, or in this case, brothers kill another brother. And so what this story does is it ends the stories of Genesis with not a happy ending necessarily. It's not a happy ending, but it is that there can be forgiveness. And it builds up. If you think about it, over the course of Genesis, we've had other brothers that didn't get along. We've had brothers not liking brothers from the very beginning and all the way through Genesis. Remember, Jacob and Esau had a horrible relationship. They eventually reconciled to some extent, but they don't live together. They're almost there, but they're not there. The final story that we're reading now is a story of brothers who do horrible things to each other and then forgive each other. So the element isn't just, it doesn't happen, the murder doesn't happen. Jacob and Esau almost kill each other. They don't. Several times they almost kill each other. It says it in the Torah. Esau wanted to kill Jacob. But in this story, they don't only avoid killing each other, they forgive each other. And that's why this story is so important. Is the Joseph cycle is the way we hope it ends up. Not necessarily again with a happy ending, but with forgiveness, and it's a bad story. But if we can overcome this darkness and figure out a way to forgive each other, then there's hope for humanity. If we tolerate each other, we can go our separate ways. That's okay, but it's never going to fix it until we actually forgive each other. And that's That's the point of this story. The why it's such a big part of the book of Genesis. It's not a coincidence. It's not just because of Joseph being, the story of how the brothers wind up in Egypt and how the tribes all wind up working together later on. Because one family figures out a way to forgive, and potential is there for everybody. And it has to be bad. It can't just be, well, he screwed me over in business and we didn't talk for a few years. No, this is pretty bad. This is about as bad as it can be. One brother was almost murdered by the other brothers. It's not a little thing. It's not a medium-sized thing. It doesn't get worse than this. You almost had a murder.
Well, and it wasn't passionate at all. It was so calculated.
Oh yeah.
Very calculated.
That's where we have to say this is would have been a premeditated murder.
Right.
We sat there for days in the Midrash, and again, the rabbis don't focus on that much. We do today because I think we're a little bit more aware of this psychology. Not that the rabbis weren't aware of this psychology; they are, but they don't dwell on it or focus on it as much as we do, because we understand now how important psychology is for us, how important it is for us to
and aspects of the law that we've become more than acquainted with just in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think we understand more about we're a little bit more self-aware. Again, it's not that we're better. There's still parts of us that are, because we're human beings, but we're capable of doing these kinds of things. We are more aware of it. We understand what we're capable of doing, and we're at least working at trying to get to the underlying issues, and not just saying, okay, well, that's who we are.
Right.
And we understand that when it comes down to the end is that somehow we have to be able to have forgiveness, because the world can't stand without forgiveness. If we can't forgive people, the world can't stand. And that's the message. The strange thing is that's the message of the story of Joseph. It's a story of forgiveness. At the end of it, what it really is that's what it is. It's a story of forgiveness. And it doesn't work unless it's really, really bad. I mean, forgiving somebody for a minor transgression, it's sometimes not easy either. But the question of what are the limits? What can you forgive somebody for? Joseph can forgive his brothers for almost killing him. Then it's possible for us to forgive people for doing a lot less. That's what, if you want to know what 15 chapters of the Bible are there for. All right, so let's look at the sale. We're going to finish up with this section today.
The sale. While the brothers of Joseph were deliberating upon his fate, 7 Midianitish merchantmen passed near the pit in which he lay. They noticed that many birds were circling above it, whence they assumed that there must be water therein, and being thirsty, they made a halt in order to refresh themselves. When they came close, they heard Joseph screaming and wailing, and they looked down into the pit and saw a youth of beautiful figure and comely appearance. They called to him, saying, "Who are you? Who brought you here? And who cast you into this pit in the wilderness?" They all joined together and dragged him up and took him along with them when they continued on their journey. They had to pass his brothers, who called out to the Midianites, "Why have you done such a thing to steal our slave and carry him away with you? We threw the lad into the pit because he was disobedient. Now then, return our slave to us." The Midianites replied, "What? This lad you say is your slave, your servant? More likely is it that you are all slaves to him. For in beauty of form, in pleasant looks and fair appearance, he excels you all. Why then will you speak lies to us? We will not give ear to your words, nor believe you, for we found the lad in the wilderness, in a pit, and we took him out, and we will carry him away with us on our journey." But the sons of Jacob insisted, "Restore our slave to us, lest you meet death at the edge of the sword."
So the rabbis notice, of course, that at least in the version of the Midianites are the ones who pull them out.
Mhm.
So how do the Midianites pull them out? So the rabbis have Joseph screaming and yelling in the pit. And they don't want to hear it anymore. So they go away from the pit. They're not by the pit. So in this version, they're not there to do any kind of bartering in a sense right away because they're not there. The Midianites come by, see the signs that there's water or a person, whatever, in the pit. They come by, they pull them out. They see this beautiful kid. The other guys come back, the brothers come back, and they say, "You can't take our slave," which again goes to this idea that he was going to be sold as a slave. And the Midianites say, "Are you kidding me? This kid looks much better than you. You can't, more likely, you are his slave." And so the brothers are in a bit of a bind now. And so they threaten to go to war with the Midianites over the slave, over their property. Again, the Midianites take one look at Joseph, look at the brothers, and go, "No, he's not your slave." He's got that appearance, and of course, the idea would be they're kind of rough-looking shepherds. And Joseph, as we've already read, for those who weren't here the last couple of weeks, Joseph is a little bit of a dandy, to put it mildly. Well, the rabbis, as we read last week, have him wearing makeup already. Before he's even in Egypt, he's wearing makeup. So I promise you, it's there in the text. So yeah, the Midianites don't buy it, but they're ready to go
A
to war.
version that I have of a different Midrash says, Joseph, though only 17 years old, was already a sophisticated youth. He did things that youths do. He made eyes at girls, he walked with a swagger, and he styled his hair.
Yep.
I love that.
Though the rabbis are a little bit less, as we read before, they're a little less that he's making eyes at women.
Yeah.
No, I mean, will somebody bear me out who's here last week?
Yes, I remember reading that part.
I'm gonna.
Yeah, that's what
I
we
said
did.
he was gender nonconforming.
That was
Ah,
Right.
fluid gender.
I'm just going to show you because it's right here.
I love it, gender nonconforming.
Yes, it says here. What did it say? Oh man. Well, it says he was born beautiful.
Or somewhere. I
Uh,
remember reading it.
what does it say? It said,
Oh, here it is. Something boyish about Joseph. He painted his eyes, dressed his hair carefully, and walked with a mincing step.
mincing step.
Aha.
Mincing step.
Mincing step.
What's about as,
Swagger, this says.
that's about as euphemistic as the rabbis can get with that mincing step. Wow. Yeah, no, they were pretty consistent with that. So let's read what happens here.
I also read that the long sleeves was because he did not do any heavy work.
That's another version of this of it being a long sleeve rather than an
Right.
ornament. Yeah, you can't be walking around with long sleeves, like sleeves that maybe even went over your hands. It's kind of
Right.
like when you think about it, the images of like in the Last Emperor with Puyi, with the Chinese emperor, with having a garment that covers his hands. Like he doesn't need to
Right.
use his hands. He never should have to pick up anything. Like not
Or
even
very long nails.
yeah. Never should ever have to. Yeah. So that's kind of their, and it probably there were Near Eastern cultures that they came into contact with where there were people who you never saw their hands. Why? Because they should never need to use their hands.
Right.
Wild. All right. So here's the sale.
Okay, I need to
Go down a little
scroll
further.
down some more. We read that part. Rabbi?
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
the,
We're at unaffrighted.
the Midianites drew their weapons. Yeah.
Unaffrighted, the Midianites drew their weapons, and amid war whoops, they prepared to enter into a combat with the sons of Jacob. Then Simon rose up, and with bared sword he sprang upon the Midianites, at the same time uttering a cry that made the earth reverberate. The Midianites fell down in great consternation, and he said, I am Simon, the son of the Hebrew Jacob, who destroyed the city of Shechem alone and unaided, and together with my brothers I destroyed the cities of the Amorites. God do so and more also, if it be not true that all the Midianites, your brothers, united with all the Canaanite kings to fight with me, cannot hold out against me. Now, restore the boy you took from us, else will I give your flesh to the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field.
Pretty dramatic. It's a pretty dramatic.
Yeah. The Midianites were greatly afraid of Simon, and terrified and abashed, they spoke to the sons of Jacob with little courage. Said you not that you cast this lad into the pit because he was of a rebellious spirit? What now will you do with an insubordinate slave? Rather sell him to us. We are ready to pay any price you desire. This speech was part of the purpose of God. He had put it into the heart of the Midianites to insist upon possessing Joseph, that he might not remain with his brothers and be slain by them. The brothers assented, and Joseph was sold as a slave while they sat over their meal. God spoke, saying, over a meal did you sell your brother, and thus shall Ahasuerus sell your descendants to Haman over a meal. And because you have sold Joseph to be a slave, therefore shall you say, year after year, slaves we were to Pharaoh in Egypt.
Wow. So it's weird. This Midrash doesn't seem to really take into consideration the prophetic need, the destiny, the predestiny for the Israelites to be slaves. That because the brothers do this, that's why we have to go through these problems, which again, one of them are that we say every year we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. We wind up being slaves because they sold their brother as a slave. So it's turnabout. I mean, and it's a horrible payback. But here, it's almost like the Abraham prophecy isn't there already. It's what they do that makes it happen. And it goes even further, which is that later on, during the story of Esther, when we read at Purim, right, the book of Esther, it says that Ahasuerus allowed the Jews to be sold into Haman's control. So what happens? This puts into motion and kind of is the reason why these horrible things happen to us. When people can sit around and sell people into slavery while they're having a meal, that's crazy. And the meal comes back to haunt us because the meal was where Ahasuerus did this selling of the Jews. And every year at our Seder, we're sitting over a meal. And it's also kind of ironic that we're sitting around in the meal talking about slavery. And it's obviously there. I mean, in both cases, it's terrible. It's a terrible thing. It's not the way things should be. So it's kind of weird in this way. This Midrash basically says this is not good. This is not the way things were supposed to be. And we revisit this. We revisit this idea. Let's read what else is here in the selling.
The price paid for Joseph by the Midianites was 20 pieces of silver, enough for a pair of shoes for each of his brothers. Thus they sold the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of shoes. For so handsome a youth as Joseph, the sum paid was too low by far, but his appearance had been greatly changed by the horrible anguish he had endured in the pit with the snakes and the scorpions. He had lost his ruddy complexion, and he looked sallow and sickly, and the Midianites were justified in paying a small sum for him.
so the rabbis are wondering, how did they get off so cheap? Why did they do it? Well, he didn't look good. He was not at his best. Joseph was not in his best form. But in all seriousness, look, they're also making it, what could the brothers have done with this money split? In this case, by the way, Benjamin's not there. They're splitting it 10 ways. You split it 10 ways. Each person walks away with 2 pieces of silver. It's a pair of shoes. And so they're making a point here. Oh yeah, maybe if somebody walked away with 20 pieces of silver, that's, decent money, whatever. I don't know. So it's a year's salary. I mean, whatever it was in those days. I mean, it's a lot of money, but not split 10 ways. Split 10 ways, it gives you something extra, some extra piece of clothes. And again, people would assumedly have shoes for a year or two, and they had one pair of shoes. I mean, it's not nothing, but it is, in a sense, obviously they're saying they ruined a person's life for a pair of shoes. So it's kind of a weird, it's a weird way of reading it, but there's a few things going on there. Obviously, the fact that it doesn't seem like a lot of money, and they're saying, well, even if it's not a lot of money, it's even less money when you divide it 10 ways. It's terrible. So,
okay. The merchantmen had come upon Joseph naked in the pit, for his brothers had stripped him of all his clothes, that he might not appear before men in an unseemly condition. God sent Gabriel down to him, and the angel enlarged the amulet hanging from Joseph's neck until it was a garment that covered him entirely. Joseph's brothers were looking after him as he departed with the Midianites, and when they saw him with clothes upon him, they cried after them, "Give us his raiment. We sold him naked, without clothes." His owner refused to be guilty.
Again, the Midrash there is trying to help us understand that if he is naked, which we read, how could this, that's not right. You should never be seen naked. And now the brothers are saying, oh, no, he's got clothes. Those are ours too. We didn't sell them with the clothes. We had him as is naked. So it's pretty bizarre. Well, everything, part of it is obviously that there's a magic, let's not forget the magic amulet that gives you clothes. But this is kind of crazy. Okay, so let's read what happens. There's a reason for it.
His owners refused to yield to their demand, but they agreed to reimburse the brothers with 4 pairs of shoes. And Joseph kept his garment, the same in which he was arrayed when he arrived in Egypt and was sold to Potiphar, the same in which he was locked up in prison and appeared before Pharaoh, and the same he wore when he was ruler over Egypt. As an atonement for the 20 pieces.
Wait a second. So
Yeah.
this is not just a piece of clothes.
It changes.
Yep. So Joseph's clothes, even when they're not specified, and again, we read later on that Joseph has put on this real beautiful clothing when he's there in front of the Pharaoh, but according to the rabbis, it's the same outfit, and it's a magical outfit that makes him brings out his beauty. So he had a coat that was made for him. We know that coat's ripped, but yet he has now a replacement that is given. That's an angelic piece of clothes, and it is it's part of Joseph's, if you will, his powers.
Adds to his beauty.
Yeah. Here's an interesting one here.
As an atonement for the 20 pieces of silver taken by his brothers in exchange for Joseph, God commanded that every firstborn son shall be redeemed by the priest with an equal amount, and also every Israelite must pay annually to the sanctuary as much as fell to each of the brothers as his share of the price.
This is the shekel, the coin that was given by the Israelites to the temple. And of course, there's the other piece, which is the firstborn child, the Pidyon Haben, the firstborn son, the ritual of doing that for your firstborn son, or for that mother. So that child had to be redeemed, and we have to go to the priest and essentially pay the priest to get our child back. That's not done very often anymore, but it is a biblical commandment. At 30 days, that you redeem that firstborn child, if he's a son. Pinion Haben. So that they're saying that Pinion Haben was kind of brought about as a penance for this. So here we go. What happens next?
The brothers of Joseph bought shoes for the money, for they said, "We will not eat it, because it is the price for the blood of our brother, but we will tread upon him, for that he spoke, he would have dominion over us, and we will see what becometh of his dreams. And for this reason, the ordinance has been commanded that he who refuses to raise up a name in Israel to his brother that has died without having a son shall have his shoe loosed from off his foot, and his face shall be spat upon." Joseph's brothers refused to do anything to preserve his life, and therefore the Lord loosed their shoes from off their feet. For when they went down to Egypt, the slaves of Joseph took their shoes off their feet as they entered the gates, and they prostrated themselves before Joseph as before a Pharaoh. And as they lay prostrate, they were spat upon and put to shame before the Egyptians.
Yeah, and so what's wonderful about this Midrash, again, there's nothing in this Torah about the brothers and their getting shoes with the money. But the rabbis love this idea that they bought shoes with it, because what happens when they go down to Egypt is they take off their shoes when they go before Joseph. So it comes, the shoes come back into the story later on. That part is in the Torah, but the rabbis kind of want to say, look, these guys sold their brother essentially for a pair of shoes, and look what happens. They have to take off their shoes when they come before their brother, when he's second only to Pharaoh. So that's again, an interesting, ironic turnabout of the shoes. So again, it's interesting that they're focusing on the clothes, on shoes in this case. And what they also talked about here, of course, is the ritual of chalitza, which is that if you did not practice the ritual of Levirate marriage, there's a strange ritual which requires the taking off of a shoe and being spat upon if you didn't do the Levirate marriage. And where do we know the story from, everybody? Where do we read about this in the Bible?
Judah and Tamar.
Right.
No.
No, it's
Oh, there it's in the story, but where do we have the chalitza, the removal of the shoe and being spit upon?
isn't that in Ruth somewhere?
It is in Ruth somewhere. It is 100% in Ruth. When Boaz takes Ruth as his wife, there is another person who we never know his name. He's an unnamed guy who was the one who was supposed to be the redeeming person, remember? And so they have to get his permission to basically say, do you want to take on the Levirate marriage? And he says, no. And so they do a chalitza on him. They take off the shoe and spit on him and basically say, you didn't fulfill your ritual. Well, clearly the guy was like, I don't care. Spit on me as much as you want. I'm not marrying. I'm not marrying even. I'm not giving this woman a child, taking care of that child. And I don't get any of the benefit of having that child. I'm responsible for this woman so that I can give her a child and fulfill. I mean, it's a mitzvah. It's a commandment. So that you are supposed to do it. But clearly not everybody wanted to do it, and there was a way out of it. The chalitza, the ritual of release from the Levirate marriage is what they're saying. Well, it's a shoe ritual. One of the few things we know about that we have shoes involved in the ritual. So shoes.
Have we found any of those shoes?
No, we haven't found a chalitza shoe. And we do know that the rabbis did not encourage Levirate marriage. So as much as a chalitza seems like a kind of a embarrassing and humiliating thing, they definitely didn't encourage the Levirate marriage. It made a lot of sense in tribal times in the sense that it was the only way to prevent a woman from basically being left to die. It is by the point of time of people living in cities and living in urban structures of society where there are safety nets, if you will, there are ways for women to work and for them to be sustained without having a child and having a certain amount of sheep, etc. It was not encourage the love right marriage.
Are there any groups that still do that today?
Yeah, the Life of Brian groups.
Judith, there are definitely groups that are taking that are taking. There are people who take the there are people who take this seriously in some ways, but they're not. They're not. They're not. They're fringe groups of not Jews. I don't know.
Wasn't there? There's a movie. It was made in Israel about a woman who's supposed to marry her her ex-brother-in-law. I can't remember the name of it, but
Yeah, I know.
surprises.
I know what you're talking about. So there's an issue if the woman is if the brother obviously hasn't been married before,
Uh-huh.
and whether that's encouraged for them to. And again, sometimes they haven't. But again, even in the Orthodox world, most people don't encourage people to necessarily marry marry somebody to, because we don't even today we don't say that child is the child of that dead person. We don't do that anymore.
Right.
So, and it didn't really happen in the story of Ruth anyways. In the story of Ruth, when Boaz has a son, his name is Obed, and he's Boaz's son. He's not the son of Elimelech. We wouldn't even know Elimelech's name other than he's mentioned at the beginning, and then that's it. All right. Well, let's read this last paragraph here.
The Midianites pursued their journey to Gilead, but they soon regretted the purchase they had made. They feared that Joseph had been stolen in the land of the Hebrews, though sold to them as a slave, and if his kinsmen should find him with them, death would be inflicted upon them for the abduction of a free man. The high-handed manner of the sons of Jacob confirmed their suspicion that they might be capable of man theft. Their wicked deed would explain, too, why they had accepted so small a sum in exchange for Joseph. While discussing these points, they saw, coming their way, the traveling company of Ishmaelites that had been observed earlier by the sons of Jacob, and they determined to dispose of Joseph to them, that they might at least not lose the price they had paid and might escape the danger at the same time of being made captives for the crime of kidnapping a man. And the Ishmaelites bought Joseph from the Midianites, and they paid the same price as his former owners had given for him.
Yeah. So here's the Midrash to explain why he's with the
The
Midianites
story.
and then he's with the Ishmaelites. So here the Midianites are afraid to have him because they're afraid that like somebody's going to steal him back. And so they're not going to Egypt, by the way. They're going back towards Israel, over Israel. And so they're worried about being in that land and having more opportunities for Israelite peoples to take them away. So they're like, you know what, let's just get rid of them, which is why they sell them for the same price. There's no markup on Joseph. Even just to turn around right away, they get exactly what they paid for him. But they do it.
But isn't it a good way to blend the two stories too?
Yeah, and so this is an explanation for the rabbis are dealing with the fact that it is confusing that we have Midianites and Ishmaelites. And so this is the way that they rectified it, by having the Midianites sell him to the Ishmaelites. And again, it's much easier to read the two stories separately, but we don't have them that way. And the rabbis couldn't simply say, hey, we've got two stories here. But in the story that we have, we have to rectify them. We have to bring them together. So the Midianites immediately turn around and sell them to the Ishmaelites, who are then the ones who are going to bring them to Egypt. So next week, folks, and God willing, we'll be back in Santa Clarita, Southern California.
Safe travels.
We're going to be reading about Joseph and his, as it says, his three masters. Because we sometimes forget, Joseph's story is much more complicated than simply, he winds up as a slave, and I'm intrigued by this because guess what? We're going to be reading about Joseph in Potiphar's house As you can see, there's a whole lot about Joseph being in Egypt that we don't have. So I promise you, it's some weird stuff, and but some interesting stuff. Again, I mean, obviously some really kind of fill in the blanks, but also making the story even more powerful, more dramatic. All right, everybody, stay healthy,
Stay safe.
Stay healthy.
positive. We look forward again. You can join us tomorrow night in the Torah study.
Let's see.
Hey,
Bye-bye.
have
The
fun.
story-
Driveway.
Pictures.
Tomorrow night, Rabbi.
you can
For
Torah.
Torah.
All right, take care, everybody.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.